Why expats don't learn French in France, or at least not always. Hi, my name's Chris. I'm from We Communicate. I work at We Communicate. I'm a French teacher, and this is the channel of, how could we call it? Adults, grown-ups, who are learning French, who might be expats, who might be interested in French, adults, who've, it's an old guy channel, isn't it? It's an old person channel who've ceased to give so much importance, who've turned their backs onto everything modern that filters into creeps into every facet of society and forces itself onto our behaviour in acting modern and upbeat and or YouTubey, and we're not going to do that. So let's try and have a reasonable discussion. That was quite a good premise, I thought. If you're still with me, let's start. Now, the obvious reason for not learning French as an expat are often the lack of time, never finding the proper teacher, discouragement, or the perception that French is hard. As the son of a British expat myself, I was well placed to see the difficulties my mum encountered in Belgium, in Europe. Many years later, I became an expat myself when I came to America, where I still am presently. And this is the point I wish to address in this video. If we ask ourselves the reasons that draw expats to France, specifically, we'll find that they're mostly emotional and, in a lesser measure, practical. What does France represent when you think of France? Well, it represents a getaway, a certain aesthetic, an idealized authenticity, quality food, new sceneries, or inspiring villagers. That's awe as in AWE, or inspiring villagers. The list of qualities is vast. I believe I know this human mechanism for having experienced it myself. For the sense of amazement to endure, we must remain as outsiders. And it's a bit perverse in that sense. It's similar to not knowing the trick behind the magic. We would not be so amazed if we understood how it was done. Remaining as spectators in France goes hand in hand with not knowing French. That's at least what I posit here in this article. Or at least partially understanding what's happening around us. So I'll repeat that. Remaining as spectators in France goes hand in hand with not knowing French, or at least partially understanding what is happening around us. We want to give ourselves, as expats, the opportunity to misinterpret the landscape as we please, or interpret the landscape as we please, or misinterpret the landscape as we please. This reaction also ties into our identity as expats. Once we've found our mark in France, once we've found our footing, we function as expats and settle into this role as expats. Doing otherwise would mean becoming a real French person, which is arguably slightly less exciting, is it not? I share these thoughts with no hint of judgment whatsoever. They're simply human traits that I've seen in myself and in others. The amazement towards a country is the same behaviour shown by a visitor in a museum. We've all seen YouTube videos of expats living the dream life between camembert, cheese and wine. It's the same thing as when I went to New York the first time over 25 years ago and came back saying everything was so much better, everything was... In that time, it's funny because you couldn't even get a takeaway coffee in Europe. That's how far away it was. We were looking at our takeaway coffees, proudly drinking coffee in the streets of New York. Never seen anything like it. I used to know Muzak in supermarkets and in lifts. They were already playing pop music in American supermarkets. It really was two different universes, America and Europe. Similarly, until a tourist arrives in the UK, they might believe in cute little cottages and tea at 4, before realising that the slightest house starts at £500,000 without there being much else available. If you live in the UK, you know this is true. Yes, the UK does have a big housing problem. And by the way, they drink coffee now, not tea. You might agree with that also. In that respect, France holds a very unique position in the world as an ideal country. Is that not true? I really do think that France holds a very unique position in the world as an ideal country. Apart from Italy, maybe? Few others combine ideas of culture, language, food and scenery as France does. Maybe France and Italy are the two exceptions. I've known people who were quite fascinated with Japan. Japan seemed to have that effect on people, but certainly France and Italy. So why would any expat ever wish to burst that bubble? Makes sense. It's an ideal country. Why would I want to not have this sense of amazement endure? In the most recent Olympics, athletes were seen wearing berets. How do you pronounce beret? Is it beret? It's not a berry. A beret. Athletes were seen wearing berets and striped jumpers. Remember in Paris Olympics? An innocent bit of fun maybe. But could we imagine similar athletes in the UK dressing up in bowler hats and black suits, reading the Times newspaper and pretending to work in the city? Would women wear curlers in their hair, stockings and cardigans to emulate the 1950s housewife? Although I think the curlers were a bad example, because until 2 years ago I think it was a fashion statement in Manchester. Girls were walking around in the street with the curlers in their hair. Okay, bad example probably, but you probably have in mind, typical 1950s British housewife while the husband goes off to work. And yeah, back then there were just two genders, in case I'm offending anyone. I'm not leaving anyone out, I'm just saying it's the typical representation of what we had of England. And you probably all picture John Cleese with his funny walk, black suit, bowler hat, works in the city. So I would not imagine athletes do that when they visit London. If the Olympics was held in London, would we see people waving Union Jacks? And I don't know. So France, I think, if this proves anything, is that France does have this effect on people. There's a myth, there's a mythology that comes with France. France might be more deeply rooted in tradition than we realise. Or maybe we do realise it, and that's precisely what we like about France. But there is a happy side to knowing French. All this being said, an expat has complete freedom to enjoy their status as a tourist and continue to perceive France through their unique angle. It is true, they have complete freedom of perceiving France as they want, through the spectrum of a tourist, through the spectrum of an expat, and why not? But to those of us who know France and the French people as insiders, and I'm speaking about myself, none of these traits usually associated with France are of any true significance. None. Even though the bread might taste unique, we know that behind it all, there is a people, a French people, who exchange thoughts, emotions, and ideas. To get to know what is really French, we must understand the people at a high level of communication. And saying, "Bonjour madame, deux croissants s'il vous plaît," is not going to get us any closer to knowing France. By learning the French language well, we might lose a dream, but gain another. There's an exchange when we learn French at a high level. Thanks to the language, we have many more tools to truly explore the country and its people. We'll understand how they think, what makes them tick, and how they view themselves as a nation. With the French language on our side, we'll be able to enjoy our discoveries as a tourist, but it will be done at a higher level of quality. The conversation we drum up with the vendor at the market will be the chance for a real exchange. They in turn will be more open thanks to your efforts to fit in rather than to observe. And that's the example of the museum once more. What do you want to be? Do you want to be an observer in the museum, or do you want to be a player, play an active role in France? Your choice once more, and then again, I'm saying it without the slightest hint of judgment. But there are advantages, I believe, to knowing French. Let's speak about them, the perks of knowing French. As a hotspot for tourism, France attracts a boatload of visitors every year. Some like it so much that they buy a second home to live the French life with the locals they saw while on holiday. If you own such a holiday home, you'll know that things break down, that the property requires maintenance. You will sooner or later have a need to interact with French traders. It can be interesting to see the exchange through the eyes of a French trader. Do they see dollar bill signs and loaded tourists written all over? Or do they feel pressure to apply normal rates and service as they would to a French person? If you can't talk back in French, it's going to be very, very hard to demand a fair deal in your exchanges with French traders. Speaking French at a proper level signifies, watch out, I'm not a fool. Even if there's no malicious intent from the traders, the language barrier will cause a trader to place you in the tourist category. You are a tourist. They might figure they'll likely never see you again and have no reason to perform a high standard service. People are territorial and like to belong to a community. If we present ourselves as other, it's an extra reason to create a distance. Doctors might not bother to get to the bottom of the problem if you have a medical problem. Restaurant staff might figure you'll be pleased with less because you are a tourist. Any which way we look at it, life will be slightly more expensive and service will be lesser if you continue in your role as an expat. For more on this topic, I have a second article, The Risks of Retiring in France, which I'll be making a video of. I think I'll be putting the link beneath this video if you're interested, the risks of retiring in France, which goes into much more detail. To conclude this short video, we know why we love France, of course we do. And there's nothing wrong with being a fully fledged expat who doesn't know a word of French. As we saw, it enables the feeling of mystery and wonder to go on indefinitely. I would argue that this reaction is subconscious and has the purpose of preserving an identity. The identity of an expat, the identity of a tourist. But knowing French and being an expat are not necessarily contradictory. You can still be an expat, you can still learn French, use French at a high level, and maintain those two identities. One doesn't come at the cost of the other necessarily. It can open up the doors to new conversations, new discoveries that are infinitely more enriching than the pleasure of bread and cheese. As much as we like bread and cheese, there's more to France than that. There really is. With the French language, you'll be able to penetrate the core of the culture of the country and its people. Thinking otherwise would imply that France is defined by everything but the human factor. We could take away all the people of a village and replace them with anyone else. Of course not. The people are the country. It's not the food, it's not the wine, it's not the cheese, and it's not the stereotypes, and it's not the beret, and it's not the striped jumper. It's not the myths that we project onto France. It is the people of France. And this, of course, to understand them and to know the people of France, it automatically, necessarily goes through the language. Otherwise, we're just projecting onto France. We're imagining. I've seen, this is no longer in the article and I'm ad-libbing here, but I've seen countless, well, not countless because I don't really spend much time on it, but I have seen some. I went from countless to some. I've seen some YouTube videos of expats living the dream life in France, and oh, it's so ideal, and why didn't I leave America before, and look at this, cute villages and whatnot. But in ordinary terms, there is a suspension of disbelief that's going on. You almost want to fool yourself. It's harsh words. Well, harsh words maybe. It's not really what I want to say. It's you want to remain in a state of amazement, and I understand it. I live as an expat in the US, and the things that used to amaze me don't amaze me anymore. But the further away I stay from an American way of life, the longer I can enjoy that status as an expat. The same thing happened to me when I went to New York. I mentioned that 25 years ago. Germany also. I'm a keen learner of German, and when you find yourself, when you can't get when you can't get to know the people, you don't have friends, and you can't get to mingle, to interact with the people, you do develop an impression of the country in which you're an expat. You don't get the true taste of the country. You don't really know what the people are like. And I mentioned that to me, the French, I know the French as my own. It's probably after the UK, I know, it's probably the nation I know the best. I know that the English, UK, not Scottish, I don't know the Scots. I wouldn't be able to say. English certainly, Belgium, France, Germany, quite well, but not as well, of course, no. Germany, the Dutch, I have a fair impression. But I couldn't comment on what a typical Italian is like. I have no idea. I really don't know, because I have no notion of their language. I don't know their culture. I know that they have, the food, the architecture, but the scenery maybe, but I wouldn't know. So if I went to Italy without learning Italian, well, I'd be confined to that role of a tourist and telling all my friends how I'm living the dream life in Italy without really knowing, because I really can't interact with the people. So I'm saying this why, to me, the French gastronomy and the cultural side, what we call the cultural sides of France, are almost a point of detail. It's like Belgian chocolates. People are all up in arms about Belgian chocolate. Belgians don't even eat the stuff. They do, but they don't eat it any more than English people eat Cadbury's. It's not a thing. There are chocolate makers in Belgium, and they have a reputation as being good. But people don't stuff their fridges with chocolate. It's not a thing. So I think we have to be aware of that, and I see that in Belgium also. Oh, the food, the beer, the chocolate, but it doesn't define a country, does it? What defines a country is knowing how people think, the ideas they share, the way of viewing the world. That's what truly defines a country. And we would be amazed at the thousands of people who currently live in France. And I'm saying this with no judgment whatsoever, no hint of judgment whatsoever, because it is your absolute freedom to interpret France as you want. But there are thousands of people who do live in France and who don't speak French at all, or very, very, bonjour, sort of, bonjour, deux croissants s'il vous plaît. I think they're missing out on a lot. I really do think so. Because you have to know the people to know the country. Thank you very much for watching. That's all from me. That's a relatively short video. I'm curious to see how many views YouTube is going to block this out, because I have it's not a theory. It's more like a conviction at this stage. It's YouTube predetermines the number of times a person's going to watch a video. So I posted the first video, 61 views, 3 days apart, 62 views. It's capped at 62. It's really funny. I'm curious to see how well or poorly this one is going to do. But if you did watch this video until the very end, I thank you. I welcome your comments. Tell me how much you agree with me. Tell me how much you disagree with me. I'm a real teacher. My name is really Chris. You can really find me. I really live in real reality, and I really do have a French school. Thank you very much for watching, and we are bilingual, by the way. Thank you very much. Bye.